Okay, here we are. Welcome to PLP Pathways Webinar number 7. I'm Don Taylor from Main Street Middle School in Montpelier, and tonight I'm joined by two guests who will introduce themselves.
Hi there, I'm Life Lagueros. I'm a professional development coordinator with the Tarrant Institute for Innovation and Education, and I work primarily with schools in Washington West Supervisory Union.
Hi everybody, I'm Kevin Hunt. I'm a 5/8 teacher in Swift House at Wilson Central School.
And the PLP Pathways project is supported by the Middle Grades Collaborative, also the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education. And as I mentioned, this is our 7th webinar. For those of you who are watching or who have watched, really appreciate your support. And tonight we're going to be talking about PLPs and proficiency-based learning. We're also going to talk about exploration phase of the PLP, and then we'll talk about some professional development opportunities that are coming up around the state. So the first thing, just since we last met, some opportunities that are coming up. The Vermont Middle Grades Institute registration is now open. If you go to the Vermont Middle Grades Collaborative webpage, that registration is right there. And I can't recommend that professional development enough. That's happening June 27th through July 1st at Castleton University. And you can go down there with your team or as an individual and learn as much as you want about personalized learning or about middle grades education. Just also really quickly, Kevin and I are partnering with the Vermont NEA to put on a one-day workshop on June 20th. It's going to be happening at Williston Central School. That's going to be free for all Vermont NEA members. And there is a fee for people who are non-members, but if you're a middle grades teacher or a 9th grade teacher and you're interested in learning more about personalization and the implementation of PLPs, we'd love to see you there. That's June 20th. It'll be right after the school year, and it'll be a great way to get your plans in place for the 2016-2017 school year. So again, keep your eyes open for professional development. And tonight, what I thought we'd talk about is PLPs and proficiency-based learning. If you're like me, you're starting to see a lot of the proficiency work. It's starting to come up in not only in professional development, but in discussions among teachers and administrators. And a big question that I'm having or that I'm seeing out there is how does personalization and the proficiency-based graduation requirements, how does that fit in to the PLP, and how are people working on that? So I'm going to put the question out there to Life, and I'd also, before we begin, I'd like to welcome Lindsay Hallman. Lindsay, welcome to the PLP Pathways webinar. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Hi, my name's Lindsay Hallman. I'm a 7th and 8th grade teacher on the Edge Academy team at Essex Middle School.
Awesome. Thanks for coming, Lindsay. And Lindsay, can I say that you're an expert in negotiated curriculum?
You can say that. I definitely have a lot of experience with it and working with that type of model with students. Yes.
Okay. And one of the things, if we have time this afternoon, we may talk about how, at least in my own classroom, personalization and PLPs have led me towards a more negotiated curriculum that I'm trying to figure out how to implement for next year. But our first subject for tonight is PLPs and proficiencies. How are people working on this model? How are people thinking about it? And how is it going in your classroom? And why don't we start with Kevin, and then Life, and then Lindsay. Tell us what you know about proficiencies and PLPs.
Yeah, so on our team, we use our e-portfolios, and each of our students have their 5 transferable skill goals. To drive the evidence for those transferable skill goals, they use a lot of evidence from their core classes, and we are a proficiency-based team, so we've been using standards-based assessments. I think the team's been using it for over 20 years, so everything that we do is assessed to the standard. So when we're having that conversation at their student-led conferences, we're looking at their work and the rubrics are attached, so we can start seeing, it just opens up really, it's more communication than anything else about how are they with those different pieces of evidence, which lends themselves to how are they doing with those goals. One thing I've been grappling with is this idea of assessing a PLP, and I've been back and forth about it because at one, like, part of me understands, assessment can be a great form of communication, and it shows where your room for growth is. But then the other part of me feels like if we start assessing a PLP, it's going to start saying this is good, this is bad, and it becomes more compensation than communication. It's like, okay, to get a good PLP score, you need to have A, B, and C, versus having a PLP just be itself what it is, a personal learning plan. So I don't want it to lose that piece of it. I don't want kids to say, I have to do this evidence because I want to get a good grade. I want it to be more personalized. Like, I want to do well on my PLP and show I'm making all this growth because it's important to me. So I've been really grappling with that whole concept.
That's a great question, and actually I'm going to just kind of steer us. What do people think about that? Should PLPs be assessed? And what's going on in your educational environment? Lindsay, do you want to hit that one?
Sure. I think that is an interesting question because sometimes for the to add value to it and the accountability piece, for the youth, they often want to see that something is getting assessed or given feedback. And I think the idea behind, for me, I don't feel like you can assess a PLP per se, but what can be assessed is, the work that they use as evidence along the way to demonstrate goals and proficiencies. So, I can't envision that you would assess a PLP. It's really a tool where they're organizing their thinking and their learning and their goals, and it's a conversation piece. I know for us with conferences, it's also the primary function of our PLP, besides the goal setting and the identity piece, is their projects, their year-long projects, which really are based on their interests and passions. And there's a lot of parts of that are assessed along the way based on the standards, but I can't imagine assessing the whole PLP.
Okay.
Right.
Life, what's your opinion?
Well, I think there's two pieces here. I mean, there's certainly a lot of value to be had from teachers looking at PLPs together as examples of student work and thinking about what they reflect about student growth and, in essence, about the impact of our teaching. So I think that's not an assessment of students per se, but doing some calibrating around what we expect PLPs to look like and what it says about the opportunities we're giving to students, especially insofar as the PLPs show growth in transferable skills, I think is a super important exercise for us as professionals. I think there's, in terms of assessing students, there's this big question out there about how the role that PLPs will play eventually in graduation. Mm-hmm. And, I've heard some people conceptualizing it that, once there's true proficiency-based graduation, that PLPs and e-portfolios, or that aspect of PLPs, will be the primary means for showing that students have reached proficiencies around transferable skills. And so I don't know if it's going to go that way in any or most places, but if indeed at the end of the day PLPs are a tool for students to use to graduate, then that's kind of the ultimate assessment. And that would suggest that we should probably be doing something along the way to help them kind of recognize that the PLP can play that role. I do just want to mention, in terms of the transferable skills, what Lindsay said about the year-long projects being part. I've seen that in WWSU there's kind of two different parallel things going on with transferable skills. One is where students learn and think about the transferable skills and use that as a way to set goals, kind of what Kevin was referencing. And the other one is that people are trying to think of creative ways to give students opportunities to really be immersed in projects, student-directed projects, where they're using the transferable skills to the maximum way, and then kind of retroactively then thinking, okay, how are the transferable skills here? So whether you're framing transferable skill goals from the beginning or doing, Genius Hour or more open-ended projects as a way to then really see, here's how the transferable skills are coming alive, I think both of those, can potentially play a role in the PLPs.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things, so I want to go back to the original question of should PLPs be assessed, and I personally am not assessing the PLPs because what I am doing is looking at a PLP and evaluating what kind of support that student needs moving forward, right? So a lot of the evidence that is our kids are putting on their PLP is typically it'll be from content areas, and I'll have them write about those, and I'll be assessing their writing in language arts class, or I'll be assessing their projects, and then I'll have them put that onto their PLP. And right now I'm kind of in the phase of let's put all this work on your PLP, and then eventually you can start curating it as the PLP matures and as you move through the grades, so that by the time you get to the high school or 10th grade, you'll have all these examples of argument writing, and you'll be able to put your best example up on the top, and that'll be up to the kid to curate. But what I'm doing, I'm thinking about PLPs. When I look at a PLP and I see one that's blank or there's very little work on that, that tells me that this is a kid who needs help with organization. They need help with direction and autonomous work habits, that they need a lot of support and structure, and that's when I can start thinking about what's the best way to help that kid achieve and what their goals are. And that's also, as Kevin, as you've mentioned, that's where I start making the goals around the transferable skills, which we're actually doing. This is the first time that we're actually doing all transferable skill goals this third trimester. And my reasoning for that was once you make a transferable skill goal, you can bring in anything you want from outside school, from any of your content areas, so it really widens the field of opportunity to demonstrate that you're achieving that. But I agree with you also that having kids, if you start to assess the PLP, it threatens the PLP. It threatens to become just another thing that the kids are going to have to do. And I would much rather focus on getting them interested in a subject and then showing that interest to me on the PLP than having them do it because they need to get a good grade on it. And I mean, I get frustrated when I see kids who haven't done it or haven't, here's 5 things that should be on your PLP and there's 2 of them. But it also makes me wonder about their skills with technology. It makes me wonder about different opportunities that they have in school. And something that's come up for me probably within the last 2 or 3 weeks is this idea of equity. And our kids who who are doing really well with a PLP are those our most self-directed, goal-oriented, motivated strivers who are going to do well in any educational environment, and are those kids ones who have access to technology on a regular basis. And I'm starting to think really deeply about what is a PLP? Is personalization, does it have issues with equity that we need to be thinking about as we move forward? So right now I'm not assessing the PLP, but I am looking at it for what it tells me about the student, and I really liked what Life just said about how it reflects the opportunity that teachers are what opportunities teachers are creating for kids.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So that question came up for me because we were presenting at our last in-service, and one of the teachers, after we were going through our system, she says, well, how do you grade this? And that never crossed my mind. It blew my mind. It made me very nervous for the future of this because I feel like the state's moving toward this whole SBL, which is amazing, and I'm just worried that teachers, in order to get more teachers on board with it, are going to say, okay, well, you can give it a 3 or a 4 depending on which, like you said, I think it's going to demolish the purpose of a PLP. So that's why I was really curious to get feedback, because we've never assessed our PLP as you've also, like, it's been a communication tool. It's been really nice. You know, we use the evidence in it to see growth toward the goals, but just this notion of can you assess it? It kind of took me back, and I was surprised that, like, I never considered it. So I'm wondering if that's going to be a conversation moving forward as more and more schools are switching to proficiency-based grading requirements, but you still have a lot of teachers who are, you know, making that transition, still wanting to feel like they're grading things that the students are doing. You know.
Yeah, I was
Go ahead.
yeah, I have so many thoughts. Let me see where to start. Well, the first one is about just the PLP in general. Like, the way that we've always seen it on our team is that it's, it tells the story, and so to assess it I think would undermine what the importance and value of it. So it tells the journey and the story of that kid, both through their goals and who they are as an individual, but then also, like, their work through their project, which is they're so invested in. And so when they can share their PLPs at a student-led conference or at our project fair, it kind of allows them to organize their story so they can, like, speak to it in a way that is organized instead of just having a whole array of work. But then I was thinking about this question about technology, and my teammate Phil and I struggle with that a lot too, about, does technology sometimes get in the way for some kids to, really demonstrate their learning and their evidence towards their goals? And I wonder, like, where does it say that it has to be on some kind of platform online? For some, it's like, is there opportunities to think about a PLP as, in a different way, so that kids can demonstrate proficiencies and their goal setting and their evidence in a way that sometimes tech, I think, gets in the way for kids. I don't know if anybody else finds that. I mean, we have been one-to-one for years, and most of our kids are very proficient in their technology skills, and they have access to computers at all times. But sometimes I think it's just, even for some kids, it's hard to transfer the thing to the, putting it in a certain place because of their organization skills or something that gets in the way. So then, like you were saying, Don, they don't have, it doesn't look visually like they have as much on their PLP or in their PLP, but they might, if you were to interview them or find another way to document, their learning. So that's just posed a really interesting question and also dilemma.
Right. So one of the things as you were talking, I'm thinking about a kid who's really good at art, and maybe they create, they do a pottery, and they do a vase or a bowl, right? And it's like they can't. When you see it, you're like, wow, that's amazing. But when it's on the PLP, it's just a picture. It might lose some of that vibrancy. Mm-hmm. And then what I'm also thinking about is I'm going right to language arts and communication and communicating in multi-modes, and how visual aesthetics and how graphic design and presenting your work would be so important to an artist, like at an art gallery. And so then I start thinking about, well, maybe what we really need to be doing is, and yes, I fully admit that tech could get in the way, but maybe what we also need to be doing is helping kids develop their facility with the technology in creative and meaningful ways and modes. And again, I just thought of, like, what's the difference between Vimeo and YouTube, right? Why couldn't that be a class? I mean, instead of comparing two poems, we're comparing two platforms, and we're saying which one is better and which one would you use, and then asking the kids, which one would you be interested in, right? Because if you look at artists today, they almost all have a website, right? And so what does it mean to be facile in a 21st century technologically based culture? And how do we make sure that this kid who's a great artist is going to get their work out there, right?
Yeah, I think that's what it's about, Don, and I think that answers the equity question. Like, you take that group of kids who are not doing well in school, and generally they're not engaged. you know, and there's kids who can be successful in that environment and they can motivate themselves with grades and things like that, and there's other kids that that's just never going to work for. So the way I think about it is, what kind of opportunities actually hook those kids? And it ends up being, you know, negotiated curriculum and open-ended projects and a place where that kid who's really into art can be like, I can work on art all the time in school, and that's my gateway to caring about all this other stuff. That's my gateway to caring about why I need to, like, write well, so that I can write an email to an artist in my community to try to get them to work with me. Or that's why I need that technology literacy, so that when I put that thing on my page, it doesn't look silly, so that it actually represents the thing that I created. So, you know, that's the engagement, that's where the motivation and the inspiration comes from. And I think the question right now is, you know, what version of PLPs are going to draw in kids in that way, and
Right.
not letting it end up getting, you know, bogged down and schoolified. And I think that's a big part of the assessment question we're talking about. Like, once you assess, then it just puts it in this other category for those kids. Oh, well, that's not for me. I'm not going to, you know, my PLP is not going to be an A.
Right.
And so that's just another reason for them to turn off, rather than, you know, thinking about, you know, how do we assess it in like an authentic way, so that they actually have a group. You know, now I want to actually have it look good, because I'm going to present it to my that artist that I hooked up with down the street, that I like idolize. You know, I want it to look good for them. And I think that's what we're kind of struggling with, is how the PLP can work in those ways.
And interestingly, we're just at our point in our projects right now, like that our students are doing just that, where they are reconnecting with their community partners who help them, you know, along the way. They're sharing where they're at, they're sharing, you know, their PLPs, they're sharing, you know, products or asking for advice. So it kind of, yeah, you want it to be professional when you share this with someone in the community, so it gives it more relevance and more value and more weight, you know, and it's real. So I would definitely agree that. But and then I guess another question that just came up for me is, like, you know, every school is now coming up with their structure or their system for what a PLP needs to, you know, look like, you know, and then that becomes rigid for some kids, you know, like it's laid out in a certain way. And I wonder if, like, what would, you know, if there's these are the basic elements that need to be on everyone's PLP, or, you know, the pages or whatnot, but then from there giving kids that ability to be creative and use their imagination to think about, what do I want mine to look like? I mean, because we kind of then put it right back to the binder. You know, you got this page and this page, becomes just like, you know, kind of the old school.
Right, and I think we're not going to have time for it to talk about it tonight, but what I think, and I think that's where the exploration page comes in. And so we have a full page that's exploration. And I agree. I just thought, as you were saying, I was like, man, maybe we should have different models that kids could choose from that would contain the same elements that we need. And I mean, I think that there needs to be a structure for sure, so that there's some consistency. But where can we have kids building in their own style and their own, you know, their own message? I also just want to go back to this idea of the story, that the PLP is supposed to tell the story of the kid, because I think that's really powerful. And how are we telling stories with kids these days? And how, I mean, you know, how are kids receiving stories? Before, we just read the Odyssey about 3 weeks ago, and before we started, I asked the kids, how are you getting your stories? You know, and it was really interesting. A lot of them were getting them, you know, Netflix, YouTube, series on, you know, both of those platforms. But kids were also talking about, you know, reading stories and hearing stories and telling them. And I'm just wondering how you get that vibrancy and that storytelling into the PLP. And, you know, everything that people are saying tonight is I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense, and I'd like to do that. But then I think about proficiency-based graduation requirements and the content proficiencies, and how people are just going to want to assess. And, you know, that makes me really nervous for the opportunities for kids to be creative and for kids to be engaging in things they're interested in, especially, as Kevin mentioned, when you have people who are just saying, well, how do I grade that?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's not even the point of you know what I mean? That's like on another planet.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I see that steamroller moving towards us, and it's picking up speed.
Yeah.
I mean, right? So how are we going to outrun it? I guess that's the question. How do you outrun it, or kind of outsmart it? And I'm not really sure what that's going to look like. Just really quickly, we only have about 2 minutes left. Could everybody just kind of give me a 30-second review of what's happening with personalized learning or PLP in their classrooms, and what you're excited about, and it's kind of a tough time of the year with the time change and everything, and I'm wondering how people are staying motivated about personalization and what you're excited about in your classrooms or your learning communities. Kevin, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so we're getting into our third round of conferences right now. They're student-led, and at this point, we're a 5-8 team, so our 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders all do their portfolios and PLPs, and it's nice getting into this one where the kids are really at this point confident. They have tons of evidence on their portfolios and really are starting to tie in things outside of the classroom, and it's nice seeing them grow as self-advocates over the year, wherein that's shown within their portfolio, and when they sit down at these conferences and take it over and say, these are some evidences for this goal, this is how I'm doing with it, this is why this goal is important to me, these are some next steps I'm thinking about, or I hate this goal, this doesn't do anything for me, I need to change it. Like, hearing that voice come out, and especially those 5th and 6th graders, I'm like, that's just big for me, because that's the life skills that they need moving forward, and that self-advocacy piece and the ability to reflect. So I'm excited for that, and to I guess start up my next round of conferences to hear more of that.
Okay, Life.
I'm excited about this whole how I'm seeing personalized learning at the middle level move more towards flexible pathways. So we have schools like Facein who did it through their PLP personal goals, and kids just started making goals where they're designing soccer clinics for younger students, or they're out in the community working on lighting and things like that. And then like schools like Crosset Brook, who have just opened up a whole kind of school-wide Genius Hour approach, and they're just getting into their 3rd session tomorrow, where kids are really like just blossoming, where they're going to be taking projects across the school to different applied arts teachers, and getting out in the community to connect with people, and it's just exciting to see, and everybody's just kind of giving themselves pause to say, we'll figure out later how this connects back with PLPs and transferable skills and everything, and let's just run with the kids right now and just go after that engagement and excitement. So it's really cool to see.
Awesome. Lindsay?
Like Kevin, we're about to enter into preparing for our student-led conferences. And so in a couple weeks they'll be coming up. And so I think this is a good time. We've been really more kind of like less on the computer and adding evidence, and more like creating and doing right now with our projects. So we've been doing a lot of stuff out in the community, or working on hands-on projects, or outside, and we've been sugaring, and so there's a lot going on in regards to our projects. But now is a good time for us to wrap back and connect and start pulling more evidence and looking at our goals as we prepare to like sit down and talk as a, with our families and the kids together about, where they're at with their goals and what the remainder of this year is going to look like, and then beyond. For us, with our 8th graders, we are, we are a separate district. We've just merged, so it's a question for us. Like, we're doing all, we have all this great stuff happening with our PLPs in our middle school, and then they go to the high school, and we're not connected yet. We will be because of the merge, but I wonder, how will this process help them when they go to high school, even if it doesn't look like, what we've been doing in the middle school? So those are some questions that I have.
Okay. Yeah, those all sound good. We have our conferences next Friday. As I mentioned before, we just completed our reflection, and I guess one of the things that I'm excited about is to see how kids' writing improves. I mean, we scaffolded an awful lot, but I think when you do sort of the repeated reflections, kids start to understand what's expected, and so I'm excited about, and they're growing up too. Their brains are developing. They're getting more organized. That improvement in writing is good. One thing that's a little bit of a frustration is I wanted them to do a screencast of their PLP because I thought that'd be cool, and I'm having a lot of kids are saying no, I don't want to do it, and so I have to ask them, why don't you want to do it, or what's the challenge or the roadblock. And the other thing too that I'm just really on about right now is getting feedback from your kids. I mean, I'm starting to ask my kids feedback on almost everything, and then I'm showing them the data and I'm asking them questions about that, and I just really think that's powerful, and it really creates a community of trust, and when they know that you're listening to them, I think that's really important, and I'd like to see that throughout schools, not just between myself and students. And so so we're using the transferable skills this time for the goals. I'll be interested to see how the kids think about that. And then I guess for me, the big thing is how do I move to a negotiated curriculum for next year? I don't know if I'm quite ready to do the whole hog, but what I am looking at is kind of designing it so that students have voice and choice in the first big unit, first trimester, and then we kind of co-partner in the second trimester, and then we negotiate the curriculum for the third trimester, and then kind of setting it up so I can see how they feel about that, and making it intentional. And really thinking hard about how I want to do themes. So next year might be rights and revolutions, and so I'm starting to think about that. But anyway, that's all the time we have for tonight. Every time I end these broadcasts, it's amazing how many good ideas are coming out, and this stuff's going to influence my teaching tomorrow, and I really appreciate it. And Lindsay, thanks for tuning in. Our next webinar, our next PLP Pathways webinar is going to be April 28th, which is also a Thursday. It'll be at 3:30, and I'm hoping that may also be somewhat abbreviated, but I'm hoping to get 40 minutes in. I know that as the spring comes around, people are getting really busy. So thank you very much. Don't forget about those professional development opportunities. And one of the things that's coming out and becoming apparent to me is that we need to get your resources out there onto the PLP Pathways website, because there's just so many good ideas happening. So everybody, thank you very much. I hope you have a great Friday and a good weekend. And thanks for participating. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks, Don.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye now.
Don. Thank you, guys. See ya.
Bye.